the first thing, it's really obvious, but it's hard to do. So I hate to even say this because people roll their eyes, right? The first things that you need to do are self-care. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, so I have to take baths and stuff. But it's genuinely starting to give yourself some compassion. And that's really hard for most people, to do that on a deep level.
Angie Merced, the SLP Burnout Coach. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, Zach. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I was going through your site before we started recording, and you have such a wonderful breakdown of how you lay things out from your progression of becoming a speech pathologist and then going through a career change and sort of reclaiming your time and finding purpose. And I really wanted to know, before you became the SLP Burnout Coach, how did you get into speech pathology in general? What was the thing that drew you into being an SLP?
Oh, gosh. Well, I always thought I wanted to be a counselor, but then I got into those courses and it just it wasn't very concrete for me. And then I got into the speech and language, and I loved it. I loved it. So it's just, being a helper, being a contributor. That was really the pull for me, for sure.
Yeah. So trying to just recognizing that need in kids, and it's pediatric, or is it also young adults when you were doing SLP?
Yeah, so I'm still a full-time SLP, as well as
Okay.
I do the coaching too, and I'm a school-based SLP. So yeah, pretty much I've always worked with peds. Yeah, so and I love my kiddos. I love working with my kiddos. So that was just the pull for me, and just took off ever since.
So recognizing that need in kids somewhere early on, was there a moment or something that some sort of experience that drew you in specifically to wanting to study speech pathology, or was it just a general help, you wanted to help in some way and speech pathology was the main thing that caught your attention at the time?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It was I don't know. So psychology and counseling, it felt just too broad for me. It was it was too much, but yet, and then, so when I found speech pathology, it just felt more specific and more focused. And it really pulled me in, my perfectionistic, tendencies. It really drew me in that way, because it's just for me. I saw it as something very specific, and this is what I'm going to study, and then this is the specific thing I'm going to do. That's what pulled me in at that point. And I knew I wanted to be a helper, and I knew I wanted to work with children. So
yeah.
So that's really I don't know if that was really a good reason, but that's what it was for me.
No, that's a great reason to want to get into something, of course, is to help people. I remember when I first decided what I thought I wanted my career to be, I chose accounting. And the reason that I chose accounting, which I don't use at all today, was because my first dream was to become a professional baseball player out of college. And then all my friends were doing accounting. And I just kind of fell into that because it was this business thing that I heard you could get paid a lot if my arm blew out. And then eventually I watched out of baseball and I was left with an accounting degree that I didn't want to use. So that to me, that is what I did, is a terrible way to pick a career. It's just I guess I'll do that as a backup if I have to. But it sounds like you had a lot more direction with what you ultimately chose. And you've stayed with for, I think it was 20 years you said on
Yeah.
your website, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. You're not kidding.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've talked about on other guest appearances, and also you've written about this on your site, but you've spoken about being embarrassed and ashamed to admit that at some point you didn't like your job as an SLP. It wasn't filling you with as much fire as it had in the past. What was the tipping point for you with that? What was the moment where you said, I need to change something, I need to shift perspective, I need to connect, or just do something differently that, you weren't currently doing?
Yeah, I think for me it was I had transitioned to from like a an agency based working with preschoolers to a school based therapy, and that transition for me was so uncomfortable. It was just very different, very new, and my confidence was shot. I just wanted to get out. I did not want to do speech anymore. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was the tipping point. I mean, yeah, there was still like all those like overworking pieces, just like high caseload pieces. But for me, it was um, uh, uh, imposter syndrome. It was confidence, and then on top of all the overwhelm, overwork, all of that. So it was just like this combination of like I want to quit. Like I'm done with this.
Mm. So
And
the
so
combination of the confidence, imposter syndrome, that all kind
mhm,
of came together at the same time.
yeah, yeah, along with the burnout, and then
Mm.
that's when I said, well, this will be great. Like I'll instead of being a speech pathologist, I'll become a life coach. And that's what I
Mm.
and it was because of that wanting to get out of that situation that I went and I got certified to as a life coach. Um, and since then I've done so many trainings, but the ironic thing about it is that in the process of becoming a life coach, I learned the skills of being more confident, having more trust in myself, um,
Mm.
acknowledging myself, setting boundaries, all of those skills that I needed so that I wasn't burned out in my first career.
Yeah. When you mention imposter syndrome, I know, and I've done podcasts with people in other fields as well, and it's a very common thing that people experience in all different fields. It seems so pervasive, and it doesn't seem like uh, it, it's discriminatory. It's just like no matter how much time or how deep you've gone, how many accolades you've gotten, imposter syndrome will come for you at some point if it hasn't already. What do you think? Like, what is it, that thing in the back of people's minds? Because it has to be a psychological phenomenon, because
Mhm.
most of the time the people that tell me that they feel like imposters, or people that I hear about experiencing imposter syndrome themselves, from an outside perspective, I just look at them as the most accomplished musician or writer, uh, you know, podcast host, SLP, like anything. So like what do you think that is internally that sort of flips a switch in people's
Yeah,
minds that says I'm not supposed to be here, or I tricked people somehow
totally.
into
And it's
doing
exactly
this,
that,
into
right? It's exactly that. Right. There's nobody that's immune to it, right? No matter how much experience we have. I can't tell you how many people I coach. I'm going to get back to what you say, but they're always saying, "Well, if I take this course, then I will be confident. Or if I do this training, then I'll be confident." And I always tell them like there's no amount of research that you or training that you can do. Not that that doesn't build your skills, that can get you out of imposter syndrome. And you're exactly right.
Mm,
It is that a lot of us, because we deal with, as helpers, we deal with perfectionism. We deal with, that urge to please. We deal with that urge to be productive. And so all of those things have us running scripts in our mind that are like, I'm not good enough. I don't know what I'm doing. This isn't working. I'm a terrible person. This isn't it
yeah.
just yeah. I look very stupid. Everyone thinks I'm stupid. It's yeah. Those are my own thoughts that I that I continue
Yeah.
it's just like for me it's just like knowing they're there though. Because
Yeah.
before um I didn't know they were there causing all this stress. Right now I'm like, yes, I know. You think that everyone thinks you're stupid. That's just one of the
Mm,
scripts that runs in your brain sometimes, and it makes you feel terrible, but it's going to be okay. It's okay. Yeah. So,
yeah.
yeah, it's those subconscious thoughts that we have about ourselves and comparing and despairing and all of those things that um, really, I believe, cause that imposter syndrome.
Yeah. It does feel like a script in a way because I've definitely felt it in my own life with some of the skills that I've acquired, whether it's through athletics or podcasting media, things like that. And I've also, just talking to other people and like it feels like that I don't know that I don't want to say it's there's a healthy amount of imposter syndrome, but I've also been around people who don't question themselves at all, and that also doesn't seem like the right way to go because that can become insufferable or lead to complacency, not wanting to become better. So I don't
Mhm.
know, well, like as a life coach, what do you see as the correct balance for you don't want to be on the imposter syndrome side of the pendulum where you're constantly swinging towards questioning yourself every waking moment of your existence and thinking that you're a fraud when you clearly have recognizable skills that brings value to other people, but you also don't want to get to that place where you're just going in 100% confident that's not based in anything, any skill acquisition at all. How do you kind of
Yeah.
find that middle ground where you're swinging but you're not completely going off the rails?
Yes. So, one of the things I like to make the distinction between, because what you're describing, that almost seems like arrogance, like superiority. And you're right, that's not where we want to go. We want to be able to question ourselves too, but in a healthy way, in a way that's kind to ourselves. Um, one of the things that I think is important is I teach a way to kind of approach problems, and I always remind people that as SLPs we're scientists and we're artists, and we have to. I always like to remind them to approach problems through that lens, like
Mm,
you're a scientist. So that means you're always going to be testing things. You're always going to be experimenting. So it gives you that um, confidence, at least, to like, okay, I can try this, right? I'm not going to stop myself from trying something because I'm afraid I'm going to do it wrong. But yet, I'm still going to evaluate myself. I'm still going to course correct. It's going to be a constant, uh, you know, journey. But if I do it wrong, that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It means I'm a scientist and I'm testing things. That's what we do.
yeah.
That's part of what we do. So I like
Yeah.
to look at problem solving through that lens, but then also the lens of being the artist. You know, as you become a professional, you have to kind of let your creativity. unfold and let yourself have that path. And so I think just reminding ourselves that, like I have a master of arts. A lot of people have a master of science, right? Just reminding yourself, like, that's part of it. It doesn't have to be um, exactly the right thing all the time. Um, I feel like that is a good way to kind of keep yourself compassionate, but also just keep
Mm,
improving yourself, right? But in a way that's compassionate to you and your development.
yeah. The creativity aspect is such a great point because it seems like you can't you can't take the ultra risk of putting yourself out there and being creative in an artistic capacity without risking feeling like an imposter at some point. Because if you have success and you truly you remain true to your artist self, which is trying new things and and following the inner voice, even though it maybe hasn't been what's brought you to commercial success in the past, you're going to have to get to a point where you do something that has no proven ground in your past creative life. And then a lot of people take those risks and it doesn't do as well. And then they view that as, I suck. Everything that I've done before
Mhm.
this is just, I've fooled everyone somehow with my previous work. Like this is my real artist self. And I, you know, want to crawl back to the thing that was working before. Or you could look at it in a healthier way, which is people just aren't responding to this in the same way as before for whatever reason. And this is something that feels true to me. So there is something there. And I'm going to keep going in that direction because that's what I feel I'm being pulled towards.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, like I said, it's always like you're always going to be self-evaluating. You're always and evaluating in art in my case being an SLP, evaluating the outcomes of the
Mm,
therapeutic process too. And just but I feel like having that lens of the scientist and the artist lets me, really answers to my perfectionist tendencies to say, "Oh yeah, I'm supposed to try things. Things aren't always going to be a success. I'm supposed to fail sometimes.
mm,
How that's part of how we develop."
mm.
Yeah.
Having dealt with so many people who've experienced burnout, what does burnout look like for most people? What are the first signs that someone is starting to burn out?
Oh my gosh, burnout. The thing about burnout is that we don't notice it usually until we're pretty deep into it. But it's the obvious things, right? Like just the exhaustion and mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion. One of the things that really stands out to me is like just scatteredness, right? And feeling disorganized and just really just not able to function in a way that's effective. Um, a lot of people, you just get very tunnel vision tends to
Mm,
be that's kind of all you can see is just kind of only you're not seeing any solutions. You're not you It's really hard when you're exhausted to change anything, do anything different. It's really hard when you're mentally and physically exhausted to take like any tips from people. That's really annoying. So if you're annoyed by
yeah.
tips, you might be in burnout, right? And I don't blame you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's
Yeah.
the main. Go
Yeah. I was going to say the tips part is tough because I mean, I've done this before when when I've given someone a tip in the past, a lot of times it's just I'm saying what I would do if I was that person, not really what is probably the best thing to do for that person. So I don't know. I feel like I'm pretty terrible at giving advice when people ask me, which is why I try not to these days. But like as because you've been doing this for a while, obviously you've had proven methods and outcomes. What are some of the things that you might advise someone to do as an SLP that was they felt themselves like they were beyond the beginning stages of burnout and they're just truly in the phase of I'm close to a breaking point. It's I'm thinking about possibly changing careers or I just kind of checking out from work and doing it on autopilot. What are some of the things that you talk to with your clients about changing in those early stages when you first start to work on it?
Yeah. Yeah. So the first thing, it's like, it's really obvious, um, but it's hard to do. So it's, I hate to even say this because people roll their eyes, right? The first things that you need to do are self care. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, like, so I have to like take baths and stuff. But
Yeah.
it's, it's genuinely starting to give yourself some compassion. And that's really hard for most people. Like, to do that on a deep level. And you got to, in the beginning, you got to bring yourself back to the basics. So you have to start working on your sleep because most of the time we're not sleeping well or we're overworking. Um, bring yourself back to just like eating some meals that feel good in your body, like moving your body in a way that feels good to you, like those really basic things that you're doing for yourself, um, in a kind way, in a gentle way. So those beginning stages, um, it's really all about gentleness and self kindness and self care and self compassion.
Mm.
So, which sounds like really fluffy, right? Um,
Mm. I mean, I think the people who hate on self care and doing things like baths, like baths feel amazing to truly set up a bath for yourself, and you get the waterproof speaker going, you get the candles, you get the scented aromas. No one that's ever tried, like that's truly given in to the bath and has set it up and done it themselves hates on baths. It's all people who have just talked crap. Like there's like a Facebook group with 10,000 people in it who have never taken a bath, and they're just hating on people who have taken baths. But once they try baths, they will jump ship and be like, "Oh my god, I was wrong this entire time. Baths are amazing. This totally, it didn't solve my problems, but it made me feel good for a while. So I'm going to
Yeah,
do these more consistently."
yeah. And what you're saying is the thing is it's what's it going to take? Maybe it's not a bath, right? Maybe it is, right? Maybe it's just moving, whatever it is for you. But the thing is what is it going to take to give yourself the space to do those things for yourself? The,
Mm,
sometimes the energy, which means you might need to create some sort of a boundary. Um, you might need to ask for help, right? There's a lot of like little, they're not little though, things that you might need to do to give yourself space for those foundational self-care type things that we need to make space for,
mm.
especially initially. Yeah.
So there are a lot of therapists that listen to this podcast and also a lot of parents, and a lot of them, and again, I'm not a mind reader, obviously, so I don't know what they're thinking, but I am going to make an educated guess that a lot of them hear that and they go, yes, I would love to take baths, but right now I just don't have time to do self-care.
Yeah.
What are some things that you could say to an SLP, or a provider or a parent that's, maybe their free time is spent practicing with their kid the things that the SLP teaches their kid, and they so like what are some ways that you can make time in your schedule? How do you set those boundaries when push comes to shove?
Yeah. Yeah. So, because I'm a working mom too, I have two little girls, and I mean, and you've probably heard people say like you can't afford not to do it, right? Because at some point
Mm,
you won't have the energy to even do the other things. But I've had a couple clients where that's the thing. It's like hard to wrap your brain around where am I going to get time? I work, I've got my kids, dinners, bedtime, all the things. And where am I going to get the time? And I told one day she said, "Well, I have a hair appointment. I have a doctor's appointment." And what she had to do was she had to prioritize that. She had to, so she had coverage for her kids during that time. Um, and she prioritized that appointment. And so one of the
mm,
things that we start with, like as a very beginning point, is just like 1 hour a week. You're gonna like do something like lock yourself in your room, and that's it's your appointment, or you're going to go and sit in your car, whatever that time is for you that you need. You're really
yeah.
going to prioritize it, even though it might seem silly, like this is my bath time, whatever it is for you. I'm going to exercise, I'm going to walk, I'm going to sit in my room and do nothing, whatever it is. Treat it like you would, a doctor's appointment, right? You wouldn't cancel that because you're going to get fined. They're going to charge you, or they're going to drop you as a patient. Well, those kinds of consequences happen for us too when we don't prioritize ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. The parent locking themselves in a room. It makes me think about this movie scene. I'm blanking out on what the movie is called, but it's this there's a group of people and they're all parents, and they're sort of like they're talking about how stressful it is to be at work and also be a new parent, and they start fantasizing about getting hurt, but not too badly, but just badly enough to go into the hospital for a few weeks. And they're like, "Oh, I wish like I wish I would get, like hit by a car, but not too hard, but like just be in the
Oh,
hospital for 2 weeks." And everyone's like, "Oh my God, that sounds amazing. Let's do it." And so, yeah,
exactly.
I'm not a parent myself, so I can only imagine what that's like. But it's a good point. Like taking the prioritizing, making self appointments, whether it's locking yourself in a room or going to a bath, doing a sauna, working out, things like that, and making it a priority like you would scheduling provider visits. You schedule in things to your life and make them non negotiable blocks of time.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And sometimes it can be tricky, like when it's in your own house, but we really you have to have, when you're in burnout, that's the very beginning steps, is you have to give yourself some mental space to find your way out of it. um, I would say, like, my clients, like, they are going to figure out their own way out of it, but I'm going to help them find the space to do it. And
Mm,
that's like a very beginning spot, is because when you're just like back to back nonstop, your brain doesn't have the capacity to problem solve or see things in a different way or try something different. Or so that's the very beginning phases. You gotta have that mental space. First of the mental space is going to be, hopefully you're just going to rest. That's it. You're just
Mm,
going to use that time to rest. And eventually your brain will start to problem solve once it starts getting more rest and more space,
mm,
because brains love to do that.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the most common complaints or worries you hear from SLPs that are feeling burnt out? Is it the caseload? Is it the traveling? Is it paperwork? What are some of the things that you hear specifically when SLPs are trying to better manage their time and sort of remove themselves from the constant current of responsibility or just that constant need to engage with work?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a lot of it is the paperwork, and also very common, it's the caseload sizes. I'll see on social media, I see this all the time, is someone will post, I have a caseload of 80 students. and
Insane.
it's not fitting in my, I don't, and they're just trying to describe how they're getting through this, and then they end the post with, I can't seem to do this. Am I crazy? Am I just really a bad, like they're
Yeah.
questioning themselves when, um, most of the time, sometimes like they have a caseload that just literally just math, it just literally doesn't fit in their work schedule. Um, which in case, I had a client, but until I showed this client what she was doing, like that it was just more, there was more on her plate than what was in her schedule. I always teach schedule congruence. If you're doing work, it has to be in your schedule. Even the paperwork, all of it
Mm,
has to be in your work schedule. And that's even if you're self-employed, because I always say we're professionals. We get paid for the work we
yeah.
do. So
Yeah.
has to be in your schedule. So anyway, when I showed her that, it just helped her see like, oh, I'm not terrible. I'm not crazy. She ended up leaving that position, and they hired two people to replace her.
Mm.
So things like that
So there you go.
common.
She's
Yeah,
doing the
things like that
double
are common.
dipping, double job.
So I see that, but I also see sometimes it's just lack of they just need more, just to be more efficient, or it's the compare and despair that's got them overwhelmed, and they're just overdoing things, and they just need to relax a little bit.
Mm.
So but it's very common, the caseload and the paperwork, for sure. So
Yeah.
I always teach schedule congruence.
I feel like something has to be they have to be able to do something with the paperwork because I'm in contact with a bunch of therapists who work with our agency all about kids, and I hear the same thing. Uh, it's the constant paperwork and constant logging, and we live in an age of iPads and AI and all these other things. I feel like there has to be something that could at least knock off the paperwork by 25%, if not 50%, 60%. But I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But whenever I hear
Yeah.
about the massive amount of paperwork that therapists are still doing, I'm like, are we in 1970? Like, why can this not just be checked up box on an iPad and sent off? Where's all this manual paperwork coming from? But that's my gripe with the state. That's that's a different different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have all the, all the productivity hacks, but sometimes you've hacked it to death. There's just no more hacking it,
Mm.
right? So, yeah, sometimes it just gets to be too much. But like you said, some of that is not going to change anytime soon. Um, but I think the most powerful, as SLPs, the most powerful thing we can do is make sure we keep that time in our schedules so that what I think is not good for our field is taking, so seeing your kids during the day and then doing, I've had people come to me and they're doing 4, 5 hours of work at home, which
Mm.
really, in my opinion, really devalues our work, really devalues the service we provide, because that is all free labor that someone's expecting, um, which then, raises expectations for everyone, and then, we have burned out therapists, and then the quality of therapy goes down. And so, really that schedule congruence is really important. Make sure you're doing the tasks that are expected that you need to do, make sure they're in your schedule so you have your schedule to lean on.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if there will ever be some type of position like that, or some type of notary position with therapists that there are for doctors or surgeons, someone there that's just in the room that takes care of all the notes so that doctors can see as many patients as possible and not spend all this time doing paperwork. If there will ever be an in-house position in an agency that can, their job is to do the paperwork so that the therapists don't have to, or don't have to do nearly as much, so they can see more kids. I wonder if that's a possible solution too. But that's also outside
Yeah.
the scope of personal responsibility. So maybe it'll happen, maybe not. But it's something that's out of people's control right now. But you can make changes, like you said, in the way that you handle it.
Yeah. And a lot of us, SLPs, we tend to be uh perfectionists, right? So, let's, instead of writing a paragraph here, let's write one sentence with a piece of
Mm.
data in it, right? Let's write one sentence, two sentences. Let's and I've worked with people that really have a hard time being really super concise with things, because
Mm.
that's not the way we were trained, right? We were trained to be very thorough, which is great, but it's just not functional in most of our settings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can agencies do to recognize burnout with therapists, or provide better tools for therapists to avoid burnout altogether? What are some of the things agencies could do to better support therapists so that they don't get burned out?
I think supporting with I think the most important thing is supporting with the time they need to do the work that they need to do, right? So, uh, you know, planning, if you have a therapy session, you need time. If, as an experienced therapist, I don't need a ton of time to plan my sessions, right? But you need some time. So you need some time to plan a session. You do the session, and then you need a little bit of time after that to write the notes from that session, right? So
Mm.
I think the first thing is just supporting the time that they need, and giving those efficiency hacks, like just encouraging people to, yes, it's okay to be concise in this case. Letting people know that it's okay, that, like, what the expectation is, and trying to paperwork wise, trying to perhaps, right, as much as you can, lower those expectations. Like, what is really
Yeah.
the purpose of this, right? Let's not go overboard here. Um, but I think also just, I think also reminding people, like, you are a scientist, you're an artist, and letting them be creative about how they can solve these problems, and
Mm,
letting them offer some solutions, right? Because it's really easy to point out the problems, but I think it's really important to say, well, how can we solve this problem? What can we do?
mm,
And putting that, giving that
yeah.
to them too.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, I, I'm curious if you encounter this problem with people that are trying to battle burnout. Do you hear a lot of SLPs or people in general that are afraid of being perceived as lazy by their employers or by people in their life for taking a step back or for taking time to themselves? Because it feels like from an outside perspective that someone taking a step back, or maybe someone in the midst of burnout and someone who's lazy, it may seem like there's something in common between those two people where they're not doing as much work, or they're kind of on autopilot. What's the biggest difference between laziness and burnout, and how do you avoid being perceived as such when you're taking a step back?
Oh my goodness. I have so much to say about that. So, yeah, I think,
Yeah.
the main causes of burnout, I always say, are perfectionism, people pleasing, and hyper productivity programming. So, what gets us to burnout is the fear of looking like you're lazy, because in our culture, to a lot of people, like, self-care itself, looks lazy, right? Like, resting looks like a lot of my clients, including me, like, couldn't even rest without the fear of feeling lazy. Like, let's say it's a Saturday afternoon and you're just like watching Netflix all afternoon.
Mm,
Yes, they're resting, but they've also got the narrative in back of their brain that I'm just being lazy. I'm just being lazy. But it's like, no, like, as a human, you have to rest. So,
yeah.
and when you don't
Even
do that, you will get to
God
you
rests
will
in the
burn out.
Bible on the seventh day. So, humans definitely need it.
Yes, right? So, but we have this, it's almost like, um I think it's a trauma response, right? Like, we don't even feel safe resting or taking some time off. Like, even when we're at home, we still feel like, oh, I should be washing the dishes. I should be doing all this stuff. We should on ourselves, right? And so that fear of looking lazy is what causes burnout in the first place. It's because we're
Mm,
not giving ourselves space. So, but then once you're in burnout, like, you it's like you can't even you can't even. That's how I'll leave it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good slogan for a burnout coach. You can't even.
Yeah.
I'll teach you how to get out of you can't even.
Exactly. Exactly. So no shame, because you can't even, right? It's Yeah. Yeah.
So, I didn't mean to cut you off if you were going to
Oh,
continue.
no, I'm good.
One of one of the one of the most pivotal moments of an SLP's career is going from grad school to a full-time working SLP. And having gone through that yourself, is there any insight or advice that you'd have for fresh, fresh SLPs right out of grad school to avoid getting into a stagnant burnout period, or maybe some some ways to pick up on signs of burning out earlier than later. Some sort of
Mhm.
insights that you've had from your experience for new SLPs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when you're a new SLP, you do have to you have to set boundaries, because when you're first starting, it feels like you could just work all the time and you would never be done. Like that's just how it feels when when you first start. And so just
Mm,
first of all, just sending compassion for that feeling and that it's normal, but you do have to give yourself space. You're not
mm,
you're still a human. So you still need to rest, you need to give yourself mental space. You have to set those boundaries. Um, one of the strategies that I teach, because we're so prone to perfectionism, is um, do it badly. And that is a way to hack your brain. I always say, allow yourself to do it badly. And it speaks to that. Allow yourself to be a scientist. Try something. Allow yourself to try something and let it go badly and tweak it for the next time. Allow yourself to learn that way. And, you know, I say that to hack that perfectionistic mindset that most of us have as therapists. It's not that you're actually doing it badly, but it gives you the freedom to start being a little bit more creative and a little bit more able to experiment, and less feeling like you have to kill yourself being prepared. So,
mm.
I like the strategy of do it badly, with the caveat of it's not that you're actually doing it badly. It's like when you are, because your brain will always say, this is terrible. You're doing it wrong, right? Your brain will always say that to you. Um,
Mm.
but then you just answer your brain with, yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm doing it badly, but I'm
Yeah.
doing it. That's the key, is I'm doing it. I'm not stuck in preparation. I'm not stuck in fear. So that's a big thing that I think is important for all SLPs really, but especially, first starting out, because you're going to have that compare and despair probably, and you're going to have that, those confidence. Your confidence is you're going to test. It's going to test you. Um, so boundaries. Let yourself do it badly. Let yourself experiment. Let yourself be creative. And then two, there's going to be times when you. I always say we never work for free, right? But as a beginning
Mm.
SLP, so you are going to have things where you need to invest. You're going to invest in some things that are going to save you time later. So, like that first time when you first write that report on this certain type of client, you're going to write that report and it's going to take you a long time. But the next time you do that, it's going to take you less than half the time, because it's going to be
Yeah.
there. So knowing that there is going to be some moments of investment there, but just knowing that that's not going to be forever. I think a lot of
Mm.
SLPs, they're working like that, but they don't stop working like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
Yeah, yeah,
sense.
yeah.
And with the do it badly advice, I've also heard something similar for writer's block, which is if you're having trouble writing something, it's not that you're having trouble with the act of writing. It's just that your expectation is that everything you write has to be good. So then just write the biggest piece of crap you can, and doesn't matter what it
Yeah.
is. And in that 500 words of crap, there will be some golden nuggets that you can expand on. But just I feel like that's really good advice. Do it badly for whatever it is that you're doing. It can apply to outside the SLP profession, to just get yourself in, like, get your body and mind moving in a way that is not frozen or judgmental.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep.
So for therapists listening to this who may be interested in reaching out to you or working with you, what should they expect in the first few weeks or month working with a burnout coach, an SLP coach?
So, you're going to have a lot of fun. It's like when you work with a burnout coach, you think it's going to be like all this like serious stuff, but it's a lot of learning self-compassion and learning self-trust and learning self-acknowledgement. And yes, that's uncomfortable because we're not used to it, but we make it fun. And we give you, specific things to do and ways to practice it and report back, and ways to evaluate yourself that are gentle. And yeah, I just keep coming back to the word self-compassion because
Mm,
that's the whole underpinning of preventing burnout is trusting yourself, being compassionate with yourself. So that is the journey, and it feels really good, even though it's hard to imagine that burnout coaching could feel really good. It's not
yeah.
what's the word? It's simple, but it's not easy. Is that the one? Is that the the process that
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
thinking?
simple. It's yeah, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy, something like that.
Yes.
But yeah, same
So,
sentiment.
yeah. Yeah. So if it's not easy, at least let's make it fun, right? And for me, like, I'm very real in my sessions. Like, it's we talk about everything, not just speech. It's because you're a whole person. You're a whole
Mm,
person. So we just put it all out there.
absolutely.
Yeah.
What's the best place for people to follow you and keep up with your work?
So best place is to get on my email list, which you can go to slpburnoutcoach.com. Um, I have like stepped back from social media for like the past couple months.
Mhm.
Um, but I have lots of stuff on Instagram, Angie Merced, and Facebook. Uh, but like I said, I've because I've been managing my own energy, I've stepped back from social media for a little bit. I don't know. We'll see how long that is. But I have lots of material. I also have a Facebook group called SLP Burnouts. Wait. Unstoppable SLP Burnouts that is
Mm.
free to join. And there's lots of resources within that group as well.
Perfect. And all of that for everyone watching or listening to this, that will all be linked in the description of this podcast. So please go check out Angie's resources. Angie Merced, thank you so much for joining me on the All About Kids podcast. This has been an absolute blast. You have, it informed me in very insightful ways. And I also want to, like you're stepping back from social media, I want to step into a bath, and perhaps I'll do that later tonight or this weekend because now that is on my mind as well. But thank you
There
so
you go.
much, Angie. This has
There you
truly
go.
been a blast.
Thank you for having me. Yes, give yourself space.